What started as a discussion about military spending and the war in Iran quickly turned into a much more personal confrontation between Senator Elissa Slotkin and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Slotkin questioned whether the administration could claim success while the Strait of Hormuz remained effectively blocked, and then pushed Hegseth toward an even more consequential question. What would he do if a president asked the military to intervene in the 2026 elections? Hegseth resisted the premise. Slotkin refused to let the question go.
Gentlemen, you're here to ask for $1.5 trillion, 40% more than what we gave you last year, $1 trillion. And I agree with the chairman of this committee that the world has never been more dangerous and complicated. And regardless of whether we disagree on the reasons for getting into this war, I think we can all agree that we want our military to come out of it safely and successfully and as soon as feasible. The military has taken, the administration has taken military action in 10 different places in the world in 15 months, more than any president in U.S. history.
Slotkin began by putting the hearing in the context of a much larger request for military funding. But she also acknowledged the central objective shared by both sides: getting American forces through the conflict safely and successfully. Her argument was that the size of the military response made the consequences impossible to ignore. And in her view, the war with Iran was different because Americans were beginning to feel its effects directly.
I think President Trump has really become a foreign policy president. And many of those operations, were on the news for a couple of days, but then the American public didn't feel them. And I think the difference with this war with Iran is that the American public is feeling it in their pocketbooks. Gas in Michigan is $4.99 today. The cost of fertilizer, of airline tickets, things that are real to people. Secretary Hegseth, the president said that you were most keen on this war. He said that you were the most gung-ho about it. I think despite us all wanting to come out of this successfully, it is hard to miss that we are at the stalemate, that we don't control the Strait of Hormuz because shipping is not getting through. And we can block what they're trying to get through, but nothing is moving and it's costing the American public. And I think that's a fundamentally different moment than the rest of the military action we've taken. Even in Middle East 101 class, we used to talk about and run war games on the Strait of Hormuz. It's a strategic geography that the Iranians have. And I think it's just concerning to me that we can try and tell the...
That was the first major shift in Slotkin's questioning. Instead of treating the conflict as something distant from everyday life, she focused on the economic pressure she said Americans were experiencing. Gas, fertilizer, and airline costs became part of her argument that the consequences of the war were no longer confined to military headlines.
The American people that it's going great and we're killing it, but until the Strait of Hormuz is open, I don't think we can credibly say that with any seriousness. I think the question I have for you, though, is future looking, and it's our 2026 elections. The president has been very clear. He said in the State of the Union that essentially if his side doesn't win, then the election was rigged. He said that before the 2020 election. He's asked for voter rolls for 29 different states. He just asked for Detroit's votes or ballots. And we know that in 2020, he wrote an executive order that he didn't sign that said to the U.S. military, to the Secretary of Defense, you should go and seize ballots and voting machines. A few months ago, he said that he regretted that he didn't sign that executive order. So
the focus then narrowed to the Strait of Hormuz. Slotkin's argument was straightforward. Regardless of how the administration described the broader military campaign, the situation around the strait remained a central measure of whether the operation was actually succeeding. She described the strategic importance of the location and connected the continued disruption of shipping to the costs being felt by the public.
The U.S. military has never been deployed. You incorrectly said yesterday that they were deployed during different elections. Governors deployed them under their authorities, but the federal government has never put the uniformed military at our polls during World War II, right after 9/11. We've never had to do that. So Secretary Hegseth, If the president, who regrets not signing that executive order to the then SecDef in 2020, asks you to seize ballots or voting machines in states during the 2026 election, will you stand up for the Constitution and say no, or will you salute and do his bidding?
And then Slotkin abruptly moved from the war to the 2026 elections. But the connection was important to her questioning. She was no longer asking only about the current military operation. She was asking how the Defense Department would respond if political pressure reached the military itself. That set up the most contentious part of the exchange.
Senator, I didn't get a chance to answer the front part of your question, which, there was a lot of deferred maintenance under the Biden administration that needed to be addressed because the world was in chaos when President Trump was elected.
Just address the election issue, please.
Well, again, that's
the most important thing. It's what's happening.
It's yet another gotcha hypothetical, which is your specialty.
It's not. We had
an
executive order
under the Biden administration in 2024.
It's not a hypothetical. I refuse to accept. You give that answer all the time. You and I have done this dance before. Get over it, okay? In 2020, he's the president, your boss, the guy you're performing for right now, told the journalists this year that he wished he signed that executive order to your predecessor. And your predecessor said publicly, thank God, we didn't actually go forward with it. What are you going to do? You're the guy here in the seat. It's not hypothetical. Tell the American people, will you deploy the uniformed military to our polls to collect voter rolls or machines?
This was the factual foundation for Slotkin's central question. She pointed to the unsigned 2020 executive order, the president's later comments about regretting not signing it, and the distinction between federal military authority and forces deployed by individual governors. Her concern was specifically about the federal military being used at polling places.
Are you accusing me of performing? Because you're performing for cable news right now.
But Mr. Secretary, we have...
It's a hypothetical. By the way, in 2024, under the Biden administration, 15 states did deploy.
Under their governor's authority, when their governors asked for it.
What did Joe Biden say about that?
That's fundamentally... I don't think anything, because he needed them for cybersecurity and for COVID. Trump did it too, under Trump. But it was not the federal decision. It was those governors of the states under their authorities, okay? It's never been done in our history. Please stand up for the Constitution. Do not send uniformed military to our polls.
Do you have a response?
Hegseth did not immediately answer the election scenario Slotkin had put directly to him. Instead, he attempted to return to an earlier part of the discussion. Slotkin immediately interrupted. For her, the question was no longer hypothetical in the ordinary sense. She was asking Hegseth personally what he would do if that order were actually given. This was the moment the exchange became openly confrontational. Hegseth characterized the question as a hypothetical and accused Slotkin of using it as a political performance. Slotkin rejected that characterization and returned to the same specific scenario. If the president ordered the uniformed military to collect ballots or voting machines, would the secretary comply? The argument then turned to the distinction between state authority and federal authority. Hegseth pointed to military deployments under governors, while Slotkin emphasized that those deployments were not the same as a federal decision to put the uniformed military at polling places. That distinction was at the center of the disagreement. And finally, after the back and forth, Hegseth gave the answer Slotkin had been demanding. He said he had never been ordered to do anything illegal and would not do so. Slotkin's question had been about a specific future scenario involving the military and elections. Hegseth's answer was framed around legality and whether an order itself would be illegal. The significance of this exchange was not simply that Slotkin and Hegseth disagreed. It was the way the questioning moved from military funding to the war in Iran, to the economic consequences of the conflict, and finally to the role of the military in a future election. Slotkin repeatedly tried to force the discussion into a specific answer about what Hegseth would do if faced with an order involving ballots or voting machines. Hegseth resisted the premise, calling it hypothetical and pushing back against what he saw as political performance. But after the confrontation continued, he ultimately gave a direct principle. He said he would not carry out an illegal order. That left the central question framed in a very specific way. Slotkin wanted a clear commitment about the use of military power during elections. Hegseth answered through the standard of legality. And that is what made the final exchange so important. The hearing was no longer only about what had already happened. It was about what a defense secretary says he would do if political pressure and military authority collided in the future. The disagreement remained unresolved in the room, but the answer Hegseth finally gave became the closing point of the confrontation.